In the moment when you think things are the most hopeless, when the moment when the night is at its bleakest, get ready for that sunrise. Get ready. It's coming. That's how the world works.
Welcome back to another episode of Health and Humanity. Our guest today is Ben Courson. Ben is a best-selling author, a TV and radio personality, an international speaker, founder of Hope Generation, and the senior pastor of Applegate Christian Fellowship. He has been featured on Fox, Hallmark Channel, TBN, ABC Family, and other mainstream media outlets. His TV show is broadcast in 180 countries, and his national radio show airs on over 400 stations. He travels the globe speaking of God's hope and igniting revival in the hearts of his listeners. Stemming from his own struggle with suicide and depression, Ben created Hope Generation, aiming to help those struggling with depression and suicidal thoughts to those who have lost hope and meaning amid their success. The ministry is shouting about the God of hope from the mountaintops to help people rise out of despair. Ben's high energy, humor, and deep biblical understanding has impacted people from all walks of life. He sincerely shares his own struggles, heartbreak, being diagnosed with complex PTSD, and the devastating losses of his brother and sister. As a social media influencer, millions of YouTube subscribers have tuned in to watch and listen to Hope Generation. Ben is infiltrating old and new media alike and spreading God's message of hope like fire. Ben also has his new book out, Flirting with Darkness, Building Hope in the Face of Depression. Ben, thank you so much for joining me today.
Oh, I'm so stoked. And you got your lemon juice. I got my coconut water.
Yes.
We are ready to go, dude.
Staying hydrated. I love it.
I'm excited.
Absolutely. So let's get right into it. Obviously the topic of depression and anxiety and the work that you're doing with Hope Generation. What is it that you think most people get wrong when it comes to the topic of depression and anxiety?
That it's a weakness, that if you struggle with depression, then you must be weak. And I think there's a big taboo and stigma attached to it, especially in the church. But what I want to remind people is Elijah was suicidal under a broom juniper tree in a cave. He could face 850 prophets of Baal in the groves, but one angry woman set him running, Yeah. You look at Jonah, who led a great spiritual awakening. When a worm ate his plant, he wanted to die. God said, "Why do you want to die?" He said, "Because a worm ate my plant." Basically, you're not thinking clearly when you're suicidal. You look at somebody like Moses, who, again, asked God to take his life under a certain stipulation and B clause. David was bipolar, borderline, dancing in his linen ephod before the Ark of the Covenant. And then the next minute he's saying, "My God, why have you forsaken me?" Job was the godliest man of the East. And yet he said, "I abhor myself. I curse the day that I was born. I wish I was a stillborn." So some of the greatest with depression, but maybe if some of the listeners aren't even, they don't know about the Bible, they more like history and stuff. Even historically, some of the greatest characters struggle with depression. You look at Winston Churchill, who said he was followed around by the black dog. He called this depression the black dog that would follow him around. Abraham Lincoln would walk alone in the woods, tempted to kill himself with a shotgun. You look at somebody like Buzz Aldrin, who was the 2-hour, 37-minute walk in space, spacewalk. He struggled with mental health and alcoholism. He was mentally sick for a while. You look at somebody like Carrie Fisher, who played Princess Leia, or Kurt Cobain, or Greg Louganis, or J.K. Rowling, or Janet Jackson. I mean, these were all characters who struggled with depression. So I think it's very important to remember that whether you're talking about Ernest Hemingway or whether you're talking about Jim Carrey or Robin Williams, some of the most creative people have struggled with depression too. So I know I'm being long-winded, but I want to say one more thing about that.
Please, yeah.
So on one hand, I think the mistake we make on one side is, "Oh, you're weak if you're depressed." And that's simply not the case historically or biblically. But also the contrary is also true. Where another mistake people make is they say, "Well, because there's a biological component to depression," which is true, then I guess I'm just going to live with depression because I'm a 4 on the Enneagram. And that's sort of my ID. It's part of my personality. And that's to me, my opinion, and I have authority to speak about this because I went through over a decade of chronic depression and suicide ideation. My counselor told me, "Ben, you have one of the most difficult cases of depression I've ever had to treat." So That's why I feel like I can really speak on this. a lot of people think, well, because there's a biological component, I'm just going to learn to live with depression. But to me, that's like going to a doctor and the doctor tells you you have a disease. And then you say, okay, I'll just learn to live with it. And the doctor's like, but there's a cure. You know what I mean? And so that's what Flirting with Darkness is about. It's about sharing the cure, where I believe if people are up for it, if they're up for a fight, they can fight their way out of depression.
Yeah, I love that. I would say, and maybe you can touch on this a bit yourself. Do you think we've made some good strides over the last few years, last 5-10 years on that stigma? Because when you look at like the era of like when we were growing up, like for me, I grew up in the 90s, and I felt like just like in that time period, a lot of people did look at depression as a weakness. There's something wrong with you. And in my opinion, from what I am seeing, it seems like over the last few years, 5-10 years, we're starting to make some good strides in that area where it's no longer just seen as a weakness, but it's something that you can work through and actually heal from it. What are your thoughts on what you're seeing there?
100%. You know what? You're one of the first people who said that in a while in any of these media interviews. Like, you've really I think you've got your finger on the pulse there. You've hit it on the head. We are making tremendous strides. I want us to make more progress, obviously, because I'm an idealist. Like,
Sure.
I want us to go not only make further strides in removing the taboo, but now also make further strides in, like, this is the new hipster thing to say, like, you can't cure depression, but you can learn to live with it. You can learn to accept it, sort of like a Zen acceptance. And I don't buy that at all. In fact, I'm very passionately I very passionately stand against that. So I think if we can make more progress in that area too, then that'll be a good sign. But I 100% agree with you that on this issue over here, we've made amazing progress in removing the taboo compared to a decade ago. 100%.
Yep, definitely. So what would you say to somebody that has resigned to just living with depression for the rest of their lives? What would you tell them where they can actually make really good improvements and really heal properly?
Yeah, so in the book, I lay out 11 weapons to defeat the dark lord of depression. That's what I call it, because you have to realize this is going to be a battle. Like, you got to claw your way out of the pit sometimes. And it's not going to come by just being passive about it. It's not going to come by, wishing it'll go away. Like, you have to take up weapons and fight. So I'll lay out just a few of those practical ones that have worked for me. One is prayer walks. Like, scientific research shows us that if you talk to God about your hopes, fears, and dreams, it has the same effect on your brain as therapy. Another one is scripture scholar scuba gear. Like, there's over 3,500 promises in the Bible. If you go a little deeper into scripture, you'll find hope there. Number 3 is the magic number of greatness, the 10,000 hour rule. Like, if you look at the Beatles, they were playing clubs at 7 hours or 8 hours a night, 7 days a week at a club in Hamburg, Germany. So that's why they're so amazing when they come to England with the British, or America from England with the British invasion. So stop crying, start sweating, like, work the craft. Number 4, rewrite your story. That's a big one. Like, if you feel like you've lost the plot, I believe our God is the author of our faith, who has all our days written in his book. There's a predestination and conglomeration with the freedom that we have. There's this cosmic dance that we can jump into. Another real practical one is endorphins. When you exercise, you release endorphins in your body, which are structurally similar to the drug morphine in regards to what they trigger, called opioid receptors in your brain, that actually are natural pain-killing chemicals. So a 40-minute jog has the same effect on your body as an antidepressant. Another one is own your oddness. Like, if you're trying to project an avatar or image to the world that's not who you are, it'll create cognitive dissonance and you're not going to be happy. The 7th one, I'm seeing if I can memorize.
You're good, man. Yeah, you got
7. Let's see. Friend ventures. A lot of times what we don't need is more deep coffee conversations or ontological navel gazing. We just need skateboards and friends. That was huge for me. An 8th one for me is heaven. Ecclesiastes 3:11 says God has put eternity in our hearts. And what science is now showing, and basically there's majority support here, that all around the world, people tend to believe in an afterlife no matter what their geography or topography is. There's some persistence of consciousness after death. And the way to explain that to me is because God has put eternity in our hearts. Another one is dreamality. God turns our reality into a dreamality. We'll have nightmares, we'll have dreams, but we conquer our nightmares because of our dreams. And then let God love on you. That's the one I'm really passionate about. Let God love on you. We live in an free enterprise, more a capitalistic, consumeristic society where you have to earn your keep through upward mobility. When it comes to the love of God, just let him love the heavens right into you and the depression clean out of you. And the last one, we memorized them all. The last one is El Roy. El Roy means the God who sees, and God is a wonderful counselor. And you look at Jesus, who's like a master therapist. When Peter denied Jesus 3 times next to a charcoal fire, Jesus then built a charcoal fire and had Peter tell him 3 times that he loved him, to do the modern technique of psychodrama way before it was invented, to walk him through his topographical triggers and rewire his brain, retrain his mind, and reframe his pain. Yeah. And so sometimes the eyes of Elroy will see us through the vision of our doctors. And I'm a big, big advocate for sometimes you need to seek professional help. I definitely did. And that was huge for a big season of my life. So those are 11 sort of just skimming off the top. Yes. I go way into depth into it in the book that can help defeat depression.
Yeah, I love that, man. I love that you memorized all 11. Just chock full of awesome information there. I'm also really happy. There's a few things I'd like to touch on here. I'm happy you brought up exercise and endorphins and just more of that like proactive approach of taking care of yourself, right? Like just getting more exercise and eating healthier, and how that can really set you up for success with your mental health. And I don't know if enough people are talking about that. So I'm happy you mentioned that. The other thing I'm really wanting to get into here is that idea of prayer. You mentioned prayer walks. And for me, that's something I practice as a daily walk. And part of that walk, it's just like a 20-minute walk. But part of it, I incorporate prayer. And I just feel like when I am in a season of my life where I'm focusing on prayer more, my life just feels better. It just feels more wholesome. So my question for you is, what function can prayer have when it comes to mental health and depression and anxiety?
So what we're able to do now because of our technology is we can use magnetic resonance imaging and CAT scans to brain scan people when they pray. And based on what they believe about God will profoundly affect their neurology. So people who meditate on or pray to a loving God develop richer, thicker gray matter in their prefrontal cortex. So that's the part of your brain responsible for creative thinking. You also, if you pray to or meditate on a loving God, have more blood flow to your anterior cingulate cortex. And that's the part of your brain responsible for empathy and compassion. Because you don't really put someone on your hit list who you put on your prayer list, you know?
Yeah.
Also, the amygdala loses some of its power. Like if you pray to an angry God, your amygdala will just have tons of activity. Your amygdala is like the rat brain where fear, anger, stress, high blood pressure are located. So prayer, what you think about God when you pray, and that's why I really advocate praying to a God of love or a God of hope. It really affects your identity formation and your identity neurological real estate in your brain. So this is what brain scans have shown us is like, you look at Daniel Amen, who did 83,000 brain scans career, and he said the number one greatest discovery he and his colleagues made is that the brain can change through neuroplasticity. You're not stuck with your psychological equipment. You know, back in the Old Testament, the children of Israel were saying, our teeth are set on edge because our fathers ate sour grapes, which was a proverb, which meant we're the way we are because of our parents. And while there is that biological component to depression, what research is now showing us is that you actually can, through rote and repetition, change your brain. And one of the ways I think we can do that is through prayer.
Yeah. I think it's so cool that we are now living in a world where science and religion can coexist. And like for me, I grew up in the Catholic Church, so you know, it was just like always separated. Science and religion just seemed like they were very separated pieces. And now that we are discovering so many things, like you mentioned, everything there with neuroscience, excuse me, it's just so fascinating to see those two now coexisting.
Well, what's interesting about that is like, and that's something I'm passionate about, is a lot of people think you have to choose between God and science.
Right.
But what people don't understand is William of Ockham and Roger Bacon invented science about 700-800 years ago. And they were Franciscan friars. They were Christians. So these monks effectively, like these Franciscan friars, invented science.
It's incredible.
God and science, they're not at war. God invented science.
Right. Exactly. That's exactly right. I want to talk a little bit further with church. What role does church play in mental health? And for somebody that is struggling with depression, anxiety, where does church fall into that?
Well, I think it's important. I'll speak both to leaders and to parishioners, but I think for leaders, it's important to create a culture of hope. I think
Mm-hmm.
it would do, my opinion is, this is just my opinion, it would do every pastor good to go to therapy. Like,
Mm.
I don't know where we got this thing like, oh, it's anti-biblical to, go get therapy. The Bible never says that. In fact, it
Right.
teaches in the multitude of counselors, there's safety. Like the more counselors, the better.
Yeah.
So I think that sometimes if we don't deal with our own junk, then our subconscious is going to cough it out in our sermons. And
Yep.
there's going to be political bitterness. There's going to be emotional tension. There's going to be just sort of barbs in our words. And we got to go deal with that stuff so that we can create a hopeful environment. So I think leaders need to take care of their mental health so they can help their parishioners find mental health. And I also think for congregations, go to a church where you are finding hope. The Bible says the scriptures were written that we might have hope, Romans 15, verse 4. So if we're walking away from Bible studies feeling less hope rather than more hope, it's a giant exercise in missing the point. According to Pauline hermeneutics, we're supposed to find more hope when we study the scriptures. So I think it's very important, in my opinion, to definitely find a church where you're getting hope vibes winging your way.
Mm. I love that you brought up how we need our leaders and our pastors to focus more on their mental health and to see a therapist. It kind of goes back to the idea of it being viewed as a weakness, right? Like if we look at our leaders and say like, oh, they shouldn't be seeing a therapist because that might make them look weak, and we need our leaders to be strong and solid people. So I think it's important to break that stigma away and say, no, I think it's a good thing and a healthy thing, because if they are focused on themselves and self-care to begin with, they're going to position themselves better to lead us in a healthy way.
You're right. And I kind of advocate for a strong hope. The kind of hope, I hear a lot of mental health advocates sort of like sympathizing with people who have depression, which is so needed. But that's not necessarily where I go 100%. Like, I want to empathize with people, but then I say, let's go like Navy SEAL this thing. Like,
Yeah.
you know what I mean? Like, if anything, we should be the strongest people ever, because we fought through hell to get here. Like we stormed the gates of Hades to get here. One of the things that I like to do with my pro surfer friend Chris and my pro scooter rider friend Cody is we go to our mutual friend Chad Williams. He was Navy SEAL Team 1. I need to connect you with him, actually. That would be sick. But
I would love
Navy
that.
SEAL Team 1 and Navy SEAL Team 7, he wrote a book called Seal of God. And he's an amazing legendary SEAL warrior. And he puts us through SEAL training. So, and that's huge for me. Like, just clearing out the mental cobwebs, releasing endorphins. Like, we need to show people that you can be like the strongest warrior ever. If you can beat depression, you can beat anything. You know what I mean? So I think it can actually be a sign of strength.
I think that's so cool. It kind of, when you talk about that, and I'm not trying to dog on younger generations because I'm a part of that younger generation, but and maybe it's not even just a generational thing. Maybe it's just like the society we live in as a whole. We have really focused on comfortability. Like, everything needs to be just like comfort, and we've kind of removed anything that might make us stronger, like anything that's going to allow us to, fight through things and get stronger, right? Like building those muscles, because the society we live in is everything is comfortable. It's, convenience. And unfortunately, I think we've ripped away that ability to grow and get stronger. So I guess with that all being said, what is it that you see that we're faced with, the younger generations, millennials and Gen Z? Where are we missing? Like, what are we missing there when it comes to mental health?
Well, we're the most depressed generation ever. That's what sociologists say, which I don't know how they know that. Like, who interviewed the 14th century Burgundians? I don't know.
Right.
But one of the main things is social media. So when you refresh your feed on Instagram, they created it in such a way that, like, when you refresh your feed, it's the same movement of your hand as pulling a slot machine. So
Wow.
it's addicting. It's the same movement as a slot machine.
I've
And
never heard that. That's
so
wild.
what happens is when you trigger a dopamine loop in your brain, which when you do this, you don't know if you're going to win or if you're going to lose. It's like gambling. Is it a good text? Is it a bad text? Is it a
Wow.
thumbs up? Is it a thumbs down? Is it a good post or a bad post? You know what I mean? So it's an addicting thing. So
Yeah.
we're in this world that was meant to connect us, but is actually making us the product.
Mm.
And we're effectively and essentially just comparing ourselves. So I think that's a big thing. I as much as you can, I know it sounds unglamorous, but the Victorian stoicism of the tight upper lip, perseverance, self-control, when it comes to social media, these old-fashioned things, I don't even like the word old-fashioned, these sort of heroic warrior characteristics are so beatific and
Yep.
glorious. Like there's actually Angela Duckworth, a psychologist, pointed out how perseverance toward long-term goals, perseverance toward very long-term goals are more of a predictor of flourishing and success than social intelligence, IQ, health, or good looks.
Wow.
So I think we don't have this persevering mentality anymore, especially with 5G coming our way and
Yep.
Uber Eats. And I'm thankful for all of it, Netflix, all of our technology. There used to be this place called Blockbuster where you actually had to leave your house to go get a movie.
Yeah.
You know, so basically we don't have the kind of pain tolerance maybe we used to have. And so that's
Right.
why I'm a big advocate of, like, again, just the SEAL mentality, like David Goggins.
Yes.
Everything, every day, do something that hurts. Like,
Yeah.
I don't mean cutting yourself. I mean
Right.
something that will prove advantageous to you, like later,
Yes.
but like that your future self will thank you for. But
Yep.
every day, do something that like you do not want to do. Like every day, do something that hurts. I think that'll help us go a long way in regards to not being caught up in the comfortability of social media, but actually doing something.
Yeah, I agree 100%. There's one practice I've been taking up for the last like year is cold showers. And that's just like
Oh, I
one
love
simple,
that. I do that
just
too.
one simple thing. Like if you think about it, like what I was saying before is like we live in a society now where everything's just like comfortable and convenient. And like most of us like to take warm or hot showers. Like it's just relaxing. It feels good. But let's do one thing that's going to like take you out of your comfort zone. And for me, that's a cold shower. So,
And the lactic acid and the contraction of the muscles, it's super good for recovery, health. You try taking a cold shower, you will be so sharp.
yep.
You'll be so sharp that day. So like this morning, I'm getting pretty personal here, but like I stretch in the shower. So I do my stretching
Yep.
with the hot water, and then I end just blasting it as cold as possible.
Yep.
Or I'll go back and forth between hot and cold.
That's exactly
And
what I do.
yeah, and like these things that it's counterintuitive. You think, oh man, this is like not good for me. This hurts. This is uncomfortable. It's actually going to make you healthier mentally through the rest of the day and physically
Yes,
too.
exactly. I love that. Love it. So what can families be doing, or friends, I guess, to support their loved one that might be going through depression and anxiety?
I think listening and seeking to understand something that you've never gone through. So this is what's interesting. Neurobiology shows us that when you experience the emotions of hurt and self-rejection, it's translated, processed, and assimilated in your brain as physical pain. So some people say, like, why would you be suicidal? It's like this. I try to explain it this way to people. One time I got food poisoning on an airplane and I was like throwing up, had to be carted away by an ambulance, like was
Wow.
on the side of the road throwing up. And I remember thinking, like, I would totally rather die. Like
Right.
I'd rather die. Have you ever been through, I'm sure most people have been through at least some moment in their life where they were so physically in pain that they're like, I would rather die, like anything to end the misery. That is what's happening in your brain with intense feelings of self-rejection and emotional hurt. Your brain thinks it's physical pain. So it translates that it's physical pain. And so if you can seek to understand, like, that this person's going through pain, not just like they're caught in their head, but their brain thinks it's physical pain,
Right.
then you'll have more compassion and more empathy. I think the worst thing a person can do is being like, well, just like you have your legs, like you're not a quadriplegic, or if you are a quadriplegic, like at least you live in America or whatever it is. That's not going to help at all.
Yeah.
I think being empathic and compassionate and slowly, patiently building somebody up and not expecting quick results. There's not always a quick fix to depression. So you got to kind of be patient and expect it to be a long race.
Definitely. Yeah. It's so true to have that perspective. Ben, to the extent of what you're willing to share, I know in your book, you've used the term ex-suicide. What does that mean? And how did you end up on the brink of suicide? Again, to the extent of what you're willing to share.
So, I came close to attempting suicide at least 3 times.
Mm-hmm.
And the being diagnosed with complex post-traumatic stress disorder after my brother and my sister died, and 10 years of chronic depression after an 8-year romantic heartbreak. I have a stalker who follows me around in protests, and it doesn't sound like a big deal, but it starts to get pretty annoying. Mm-hmm. You just go through stuff and you're like, my friend who's a pastor shot himself. You just go through stuff and you start to think, man, like maybe the universe is inimical and hostile toward my very existence. Mm. And so that kind of drove me to the point of wanting to end my life.
Wow. Yeah. That's a lot there. More than a lot of people face. So your whole mission now is with Hope Generation is obviously to provide hope. Where, like, for somebody that just doesn't have any hope at all, like, where would you suggest they even start? Like kind of goes back to what I was saying, like somebody that kind of confines to like, I'm going to live with depression for the rest of my life. Somebody that just feels like there is zero hope for their future. What would you tell them?
That's a total lie. And I'm so thankful you're watching and listening to this podcast, because that is a lie. Mm. There is so much hope in your future. And when you feel like your tomorrow is swallowed by an infinite gray and things are not going to get better, when you're going through your worst, God is planning his best.
Yep.
Neurological research is showing us that, real good research actually is showing us that the feelings of joy and pain go together. Wow. So your ability to experience joy is intricately involved in your previous experiences of pain. So what you're going through right now is in service to your destiny. This is what you're going through now is not wasted.
Right.
The pain that you're going through now, I really believe this. You are forged by adversity.
Yeah.
And so what you can do is sublimate your pain and start like being a warrior.
Yep.
My friend Chad, his slogan is forged by adversity, and the only easy day was yesterday. And like going into it, like, let's go to war. Let's do this. Yep. I'm going to fight for my dreams. I'm going to fight for my goals. You know what? Everybody has a dream. Everybody has a goal. We'd be like, oh, I just don't really know. Yes, you do. You've just buried it under the fear of what people think, under the fear of will it actually happen, under the fear of failure, under the fear of failure. You need to dig deep and say, what am I on this planet to do? Then throw every single ounce of your being into that, and it's going to be a fight. But we need to sometimes stop looking for happiness in the seasons of depression and start looking for purpose, because purpose will then lead us to joy. But sometimes, like, that's what my counselor told me, like, stop looking for happiness, start looking for meaning. Yes. And if you can, like, logotherapy, Viktor Frankl vibes, find meaning and purpose in what you're doing, it'll eventually lead to joy.
Oh, it's so good. I want to talk more on this idea of the balance between joy and pain. So the two coexist, but for somebody that's going through a period of happiness and joy, how does that balance out with pain and vice versa? Like somebody that's going through a season of depression or pain, does that mean that it's just like, I think you kind of alluded to it, that God is just setting you up for a greater times ahead and joy ahead?
Yeah. And the longer I live, the more I'm just realizing nobody's exempt from this thing.
Yeah.
If we're all going to go through stuff, and you got to callous your mind, like mental fortitude, intestinal strength. That's kind of my message to people. Now, there are times, though, I will say this, and I need to say this, and I've been here, where I felt like a demon from hell or the netherworld, like, lit my brain on fire with some infernal flame. My consciousness was just continuous scorpion stings that became my daily bread. At that point, there are times you just need professional help. Like, you really do. You need to see a trained therapist, a trained counselor, a doctor, professional help. I literally did that, and I cannot emphasize enough how that was massive. And I give a good portion of my book into talking about this, into how much that's helped me. I mean, I even take away the stigma from selective serotonin reuptake inhibitors, how the postsynaptic neuron and the presynaptic neuron, there can be reabsorption so it doesn't get where it needs to go, the serotonin feel-good chemical. And that's what these popular antidepressants do. Unfortunately, that's just a prevailing theory. We need better antidepressants. But there are times where I believe people need to, take medication. Some people swear by that helping them. Right. And this is what I want to encourage people who feel shame there. There's zero shame there. Zero shame. In fact, every time a new invention is introduced into the world, trains, planes, automobiles, cars, Jonas Hamway bringing the umbrella to the UK, he was assailed by insults. Anytime you bring a new invention to the world, it's met with resistance. So look at like James Simpson. He invented chloroform, which was an early form of anesthesia. And it was the single greatest, thing that helped people overcome unnecessary pain. Because would you want to do triple bypass heart surgery if you don't have anesthesia?
Right.
No,
right.
no. And so he introduces chloroform, and guess what? The religious people didn't want him to do it. They're like, no, like pain purifies us. And that's a terrible mindset.
Right.
So what I'm saying is the same is happening with antidepressants. Oh, there's such a stigma attached to it, but that's always how it is with pioneering medicine. And I think I'm not advocating a brave new world and pill popping like candy, but what I am saying is I think there are seasons and there are times where antidepressants, even though we're in the pioneering stages, can be very helpful for some people.
Yeah, no, I agree. I'm happy you brought that up. I think it's important to focus on self-care and do everything you can, whether it's preventative or just the reaction to pain. There's certain things that we have control over and that we can do to just better our lives and take care of ourselves. But like you said, some people, it's depending on their situation, depending on their season of life, they may need to seek professional help, whether that's through a trained therapist or through medication. I think that's definitely an important thing to look at. So how about, I want to get back into purpose. And, you talk about with hope, it's important to focus on the purpose in your life and the meaning of your life. And I agree with that. I think it's super powerful to double down on that and focus on it, especially when you're in a season where you're hopeless. I think it can be really beneficial to focus on like, what is it that my purpose is, and just go all in on that. For someone that doesn't see their purpose yet, what are some things that they can be doing to really find that purpose and just go all in on it?
What excites you? That's the number one thing. What makes you light up? What makes you wake up? What makes you passionate? What makes you work hard? What angers you? What's the thing in the world that you're like, somebody needs to do something about that? Maybe that somebody's you. The thing in the world that you're like, man, this is not right. Like somebody should do something about this. That's a good indicator that might be your calling. Yeah. So I think those two things are really good sort of stimuli and catalysts that will help propel us and galvanize us forward into our purpose.
Yep. I think that's really important. When it comes to finding that purpose, you mentioned like you got to look at what it is that excites you and maybe fill a need that's not there. I also believe that it's important to experiment when it comes to like your interest and your goals, like especially if you're young, but really at any age of life, like you don't have to put this pressure on yourself. Like, oh, I don't know my one thing yet, because that can change over time as well. Like it has for me. I've been a wedding photographer for the last like 5 years, and then the global pandemic hit and like all weddings were postponed for the year basically. And I'm like, all right, what am I going to do? I'm going to start a podcast. and I centered it around something that I'm passionate about, that I love, which is living healthier, happier lives. And there's so many things that go into that, like eating better and exercise and mental health. So that was just kind of an example there.
And that's cool, good. Making people healthier, happier, more hopeful. Yeah. And I believe we're integrated, holistic beings. Like I'm big on eating a good, like healthy diet. That's super. I'm a vegetarian. Like I felt so much better since I've been a vegetarian. I mean, and since I've taken care of my body better and exercised every day, like it's huge. It's huge. I mean, I've always loved sports. So I've always been doing sports like my entire life. But even just the simple practical things that sometimes we overlook are actually are actually very essential in getting us healthy. So I just want to say, I love what you're doing with
Thank
your
you.
podcast.
Yeah.
Like you are a hope dealer to your healing presence in the world, to make us a non-anxious presence in the world. And I think that's very good.
That's awesome. I really appreciate that. And what I'm most excited about it all is that they all go together when it comes to health. Like, I think some people might hear like, oh, you have a health podcast, it's all about eating better. But there's so much more to it than that. Like, yeah, sure, nutrition is a big piece of it, but getting better sleep and exercising and focusing on your mental health and improving your relationships, right? With loved ones, with God. So for me, it's just like, it's important to see health as one cohesive puzzle, and you have all these different pieces that you have to put together. That's why the name of the podcast is Health and Humanity, because I think that humanity aspect is really important as well. So thank you. I appreciate you acknowledging it.
Yeah, 100%.
Very cool. I want to talk a little bit about this month, September. At the time of this recording, we're still in September, which is the Suicide Prevention Awareness Month. Just not too long ago, September 10th was the World Suicide Prevention Day. So what's your message during these important times, especially when we're going through a global pandemic right now? We're seeing higher rates of depression and suicide, unfortunately. What's your message for the really challenging times that we're facing right now?
Well, I mean, the last 4 months, more people have died than any 4-month period in American history. Regardless of how you count COVID fatalities, like, that's the truth. The last 4 months, more people have died than any time in American history.
Wow.
Because of coronavirus, over 180,000 people, they're saying, have died, according to the CDC. That's more people than all the Americans that died in the Vietnam War.
Wow.
Where I live, it's clearing up. It's still, you can see it's hazy, but I live in Medford, Oregon, and that's the center of the fires, or a center for the fires. There were 36 wildfires raging through Oregon. The governor, Kate Brown, said this is the worst loss of life and property that we've seen caused by wildfires in our state's history. You have the racism that is just tragic and a travesty, and the social unrest, and then looting, and you just have all this stuff that's going on, and not to mention the fact that once every 40 seconds someone's killing themselves. And since coronavirus happened, nearly half of Americans are reporting that their mental health has been affected. And one federal emergency hotline for those in emotional distress, they had a 1,000% increase in incoming calls this last April as compared to April of a year ago. And so we just live in these, we used to like conquer mystery with telescopes and microscopes and lab coats. And now it's all a mystery. Like we really don't know with whatever happens with the election. We don't know what's going to happen with social distancing and self quarantine and shelter in place and large gatherings. And if there's going to be cardboard cutouts in NFL stadiums, like how long is this going to be? And we don't know. And I think that's why it's so important that we take control of what we can take control of. That's something my counselor told me. Like, you need to be in control. I think as Christians, we're always like, you need to be out of control. But like, just give God control. And I believe in predestination of God. I'm not a Calvinist, but I do believe that there is sovereignty and even a tad bit of genetic determinism. But I also believe there's liberty and freedom. And we need to take control over what, as autonomous creatures, what we can control. So control what you can control. So, like, let's give a practical example. During shelter in place, a lot of people are like, man, I can't do anything. Well, what did William Shakespeare do when he was sheltered in place? In 1606, there was a plague that spread through England. And so when he sheltered in place, he wrote Macbeth, King Lear, and Antony and Cleopatra. That's what he did. You know what I mean? Paul the Apostle, when he was stuck in prison, he wrote Philippians, Philemon, Ephesians, and Colossians all in one bout. Bob Dylan came out with his first #1 hit during the coronavirus at 78 years old. People are always like, he never had a #1. He never wrote and performed a #1 hit until the coronavirus at 78 years old. And so I think a lot of people are like, gosh, there's just so much chaos around me. But in times of chaos and uncertainty, that's when stars and cowards are born. Are you going to be a star or are you going to be a coward? And that's our moment of decision.
Yes. Yeah. I think, everything you mentioned, with all of the horrific things that have happened this year, first off, like, what better time to focus on hope, right? Like, this is a time where we need hope more than ever. But I do believe that for those that control what they can control during these times, we're going to look back in a few years and realize, like, for me personally, I've had a ton of change this year, like with my business. Like I said, wedding business kind of just went on hold for the whole year. And just some other like personal things, like my girlfriend and I just broke up about a month ago. So like I'm going through some like really tough times and like change this year. But like I mentioned with this podcast and how this kind of came to be, I don't know if I ever would have started it if it wasn't for the shutdown, for the shelter in place, because I would have just gone about my life and just let it linger in the back of my head that it's something I want to do eventually.
That's the thing, is pain stimulates change.
Yes, exactly.
Like, why would you change things? If it ain't broke, don't fix it.
Yep.
When things are broke, you have to fix it. And
exactly.
So pain is what stimulates change. And that's a very important to understand, that philosophy, because people are like, why am I suffering? Maybe, not always, maybe it's time to change something in your life. And I look at like what you've done. Instead of sitting around saying, gosh, like why there's no wedding photography like there was before, you're like, fine, I'll start a podcast. You just control what you can control. And Chad, I keep going back to my Navy SEAL friend, because this is huge for me, is like inches turn into yards. You just control what you can control. It might feel like an inch gain here, an inch gain there. No matter how small your goals are, just start accomplishing stuff. I know this sounds super like cliche, but start with making your bed. Like seriously, if that's all you can do, like you're gonna have a hard time changing the world if you don't first make your bed, you know?
Exactly.
And so, but that does, I know for me, like this morning, I'm listening to world history and podcasts while I'm making my bed. And I'm doing it like between workout, and I feel like I'm accomplishing something. So before the TV interview, before the podcast right now, I've already trained my brain to get in accomplish mode. And so I know that sounds like motivational speak, but it's just practical handles that will really help.
Yeah, I'm a huge fan of that. I do the same, make my bed. It's the very first thing I do when I get out of bed, is because you're now setting yourself up for success for the day. It's one small act, but you're now getting yourself in that mindset of taking action, which I think is really important. I want to touch on one more thing here in terms of action. You mentioned how it's important to control like the things that we can control. And then you mentioned that some people say like, oh, well, just give that all up to God. And I think that's important too. But I think if you're somebody that does give it to God, that's actually taking control of what you can control, because you have to get to a space where you can actually pray and then form a relationship with God to give him some of that control. So I don't know if they're necessarily.
Point. That's a great point. It's a dance. It's not a contradiction. And I think, I was thinking when I was laying in bed last night, falling asleep after I got home from California, I was thinking like, I really believe in a soul-making theodicy. I just felt like the Lord spoke to me that any difficulties you have in relationships or whatever you're going through, like that's soul-making. It's a soul-making theodicy, that every hard thing you go through, rather than being grumpy and bitter, focus on like, how are you responding? Are you reacting? Right. Because if you're realizing that every even grumpy person you encounter or difficult person to work with or trial that you're weathering, like it's soul making. It's forging your soul into iron, into steel. And when you start to realize that, then you can, like the Stoics actually had the germ of the idea, all things work together for the good. And Paul kind of hijacked the philosophy from the Stoics, which is beautiful. But basically, like the logos, the divine reason, is working all things together for the good. And when you know that, like you kind of are like, okay, I can control what I can control, but there are certain areas in my life that I literally cannot control. Right. And I trust God with my destiny. And I know Paulo Coelho's book, The Alchemist, I read it a few years ago, destiny is not a thing, like it's all in your own hands. I get what he's saying. And I like the autonomy and freedom and responsibility of that. But at the same time, there is an element of finding peace in God, like I'm doing what I can, so you'll do what I can't. And I think that balance is, or not even balance, that fullness, that divine dance, that sort of cosmic merry jig that you're doing in the universe is very powerful.
100%. Yeah, that's so well said, Ben. So well said. Before I get to my last few questions here, where can people find more about you and your new book?
Yeah, so you can just order Flirting with Darkness on Amazon, and it's all about tackling and defeating depression. So you can just go to Amazon and type in Flirting with Darkness.
Very cool.
You can go to my website, bencourson.com. and all my stuff's there.
Love it. And I'll be sure to have those links in the show notes as well for our listeners to easily access all of that. Awesome, man. The last question I have for you, and by the way, this has been a fantastic conversation. I really don't want it to end here. But who do you want to impact the most with your work?
Depressed people. I do, because I know what it's like to be depressed. Like,
Yeah.
And I don't mean just feeling blue, although I love helping those people too, 100%, but especially people who are suicidal and who can't find a purpose. Like, those are the ones that I want to show. In the moment when you think things are the most hopeless, when the moment when the night is at its bleakest, get ready for that sunrise. Get ready. It's coming. That's how the world works. When you walk with God, when you are the called according to his purpose, even the things that are just pure evil, like the things that the enemy means for evil, God can actually redeem them and turn them into something beautiful in your life. That's soul-making theodicy. And I think that's very, very important to understand. If you're depressed, there is hope, and you can be cured.
Yes, I love that. I mean, if that doesn't get you amped up, I don't know what will. Ben, I appreciate you and your message and your mission that you're sharing with the world. You're doing really great work. So please keep that up.
You too. I love this conversation. I love what you're doing, and keep spreading hope to the world. And I can't wait to see or hopefully having more conversations ahead. That'd be sick.
Yes, absolutely. Thanks so much, Ben. Appreciate you.
Thanks.
Take care.